It pulls you in and doesn't let go.
All right. Hello. Welcome, Ashley.
Hello. That's very cool. I got to step up my graphic design game on Doomer Optimism. That was very cool.
Yeah, for Doomer Optimism. So you are one of the hosts of Doomer Optimism.
I am.
Yeah, you communists with your indistinct roles. Who's the host? What is it? No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. So who is the host of it?
Okay, so the backstory on Doomer Optimism is a friend of, or a Twitter mutual of mine, Jason Snyder, and I kind of just like accidentally coined this term, Doomer Optimism, sort of joking around online. And then one of his friends who runs this podcast called The Stoa asked us to come on and do like a short series on Doomer Optimism. And we got like kind of a big name in our world who is Vandana Shiva. And then this other guy, Chris Mage, who wrote this book, A Small Farm Future, which is here behind me. Anyways, people liked it enough that we turned it into a podcast. But then we sort of thought, whoever who's been a guest can be a host. I mean, I don't even know if we like talked about it intentionally, but it was just sort of like people were asking, do you want to bring this other person on? And I'm like, well, why don't you bring them on and talk to them? Because you have this whole like background with them. Now Jason stepped away from the podcast, and it's me and James Pogue are the two main people at the helm, and we still have rotating casts of hosts. So it's like a collective, I guess.
It's a collective. It's a commune.
Yeah.
It's a podcast.
We do have a hierarchy in the sense that James and I are in charge of the final say on who gets to do what. We did have a kind of controversial episode that didn't air that somebody hosted who was a former guest. I don't even know if I should bring this up, but it was a trans woman gun rights activist. And the whole episode got recorded, and then I was like, this can't air.
Why?
It was just like, it was like a lot of it was basically like, far left progressives should arm themselves.
Yeah.
And I'm just kind of like the thrust of the podcast is like, love your neighbor, like despite ideological differences. And I was like, this kind of just goes against the whole thrust of what we're trying to go for here. So.
Right. Well, that's the whole Zizzians thing. Did you see that whole Zizzians?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And part of like what I'm trying to combat is this kind of psychotic niche groupthink cult stuff that's popping up everywhere.
Yeah. Well, it's very Manson family. A friend of mine just wrote a whole article on it, and it's very Manson-esque. It's
and I don't even like, to some extent, I don't even like looking into some of this stuff because I feel like the brainworms are so strong. There was another thing that was happening around Silicon Valley a couple of years ago that people were coming out about saying like it was like a cult. It was kind of a business and a cult, but there was this idea that the leader of the cult would it's almost like Scientology. I forget the name of it, but they were like saying you can free yourself of your, what are ostensibly sins, but, bad thoughts or whatever through these various forms of rationalism. You use science more, like it's like science but religion type thing.
Right.
So much weird stuff out there, man.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, no, it's an interesting intersection really for your beat. Rationalism, I think, is a very interesting sort of like crossover with you.
Yeah.
What I really love about Doomer Optimism, that's a different show. What I love about Doomer Optimism is I think you're hitting the reason it's like, even like long before I talked to Pogue about it and found you, I had like heard rumblings of it. And I think that's like a really good sign. Like that means that like, I think you're hitting a beat that's like really important. And if I could describe that beat, it's like, oh man, it's hard to explain, but it's like nature, localism, like rejection of the blob or the Borg, whatever we're calling it today, rejection of the hyper, not just industry, not just technology, but sort of it's not like Doomer Optimism is not like a Luddite show. I mean, is it?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, I think, but in general, it's kind of like, it can be a lot of different things because, like we have people who are focusing on different forms of optimism, whether it's like, motherhood. We had an episode come out today about like the fertility crisis and like seeing children as sort of sacred and a blessing. But then there's like a bunch of homesteaders and there's a bunch of, people who are sort of returning to religion. So there's like these sort of different things. But I would say the phrase that really helps to wrap your head around it is the machine.
Yeah,
what we're
machine,
against,
yeah.
the machine. And so there's all sorts of resistance to the machine. And Paul Kingsnorth is the guy who's sort of pulled this term, the machine, out of the ether. I think it was in an original poem by Yeats, and he sort of repopularized it. He famously, he's like kind of in the Doomer Optimism universe. He's come to a couple of our events, and he's a friend, sort of friend of the Doomer Optimism sphere. And he had this famous sort of viral essay called "The Cross and the Machine" in First Things, and his was sort of like, Christianity, and he's famously went from basically being like an environmental activist, Gen Xer, to Orthodox Christian. And so like, yeah, so there's just different responses to what the machine is doing to pull us in, and that's one of them. But there's many.
Right. So the machine, it's like, yeah. And I think that when we were talking MDM, it's like, I think the divide is, this fight against the machine. Is it a right-wing thing or is it a left-wing thing?
Right.
And this is what everybody wants to know, which one is it? And maybe it's neither.
No, I know. Well, I mean, from the beginning of Doomer Optimism, and this is just me as an individual, I kind of think this way anyways. People were like, what is Doomer Optimism? Is it left-wing or is it right-wing? And this was like, there's been multiple sort of freakouts at the Doomer Optimism project, or me personally, or people involved with it, both on the left and right, where they're like, you can't like be this, you can't, like, in other words, like, you're not enough of this or whatever. And I was just kind of like, I mean, we're pretty tolerant, and we let a lot of people into the tent, quote unquote, because it's just sort of like, I don't really care what you're doing in New Hampshire. Like, why do I have a say over what you're doing? I'd like to just hear about your project. If other people are into it, that's fine. It might not be the way I would run things, but I live in Chicago. I don't live in New Hampshire. So it doesn't, you know what I mean? So if it's a localist type project, like, we don't actually have to agree on everything to just have a conversation and say, oh, this is working well, this isn't working well. So yeah, I had like a big freak out from the dissident right before. I've had a bunch of freakouts from like, left-wing homesteader Twitter, like, you're not left-wing enough. How can you like have, say anything against like the trans issue or whatever? Right, and I'm like, right. Well, to some extent, the trans issue is the machine. Yeah, it can be. Right. And if you think about it in a certain way with the profit motive and pharmaceuticals and, I think larger taking a step back, mental health issues in kids and all this kind of stuff. And so yeah, people have been mad, like, where does this fit kind of thing. And we've been pretty good at resisting it, you know.
Well, I think you guys have done a great job at resisting it, actually. You don't cave to the pressure, which I can really appreciate. And I think that you are from Chicago.
I am.
I think you're from. I don't think you said specifically. Can you say specifically?
Southwest side.
So can you say where?
Beverly.
Beverly. Okay. Yeah. See,
Do you
I'm from
know anything
Evanston.
about? Okay.
Yeah. I grew up on the south side, actually. I grew up in Hyde Park because my parents were
Okay.
academics. And then I went to Evanston.
Okay. So yeah,
Yeah.
Beverly's like it's basically like a cop and fireman neighborhood, because the cops and firemen have to live in the city limits. And so they end up like in the far northwest side and the far southwest side.
Yeah, right.
Basically.
Yeah, I remember that.
So,
yeah.
yeah,
I have my cousin's a cop and she lives like in that it's that all the cops live in like
yes.
that
And my dad's a retired fireman. My brother-in-law's a fireman. Like we're kind of a fireman family. So yeah, that kind of we were just laughing about this with my brother-in-law yesterday. We're at not yesterday, 2 days ago. The Southside Irish Parade was this weekend, which is a really fun, great event. And anyways, he was saying there's these stationary engineers. It's a union, quote unquote, working class job, but I think like some of them make $250,000. These union jobs in Chicago, and the firemen make good money. The cops make decent money. So it's one of those things where you're like culturally working class, but not poor at all.
Right. Yeah. No, I remember hanging out with my cousin she's believe it or not, a half Jewish blonde cop with big fake tits. Sorry, big boobs. That was big fake boobs. And it's so weird. It's like, and like we go out with our friends and it's like straight up like it's like kind of clubby, and it's
Right.
like it's very like
they have a decent paycheck.
Yeah, no, and she it's like we skip every line, and it's just like everybody knows her, and it's like, whoa, like what is this? Yeah,
there are actually a lot of. I was just hanging out a couple weeks ago with some young Chicago cops, young women, Chicago cops who are like kind of like party animals.
Yeah.
And it's weird. I don't know. Subculture.
No, yeah, she would be like, my back hurts because I was just beat up in a protest, and then like we're out at the club like doing shots. I'm like, whoa.
Well, it's a good job. I mean, it's a good stable job with a good salary that like continues to increase. It's a nice union job if you can get it.
Right. So you also have rhizoma. What is rhizoma?
Okay, so that is. So I have my PhD in environmental sociology from Washington State University. And so when I was in grad school, I was basically like, there's no way I'm going to become a tenure track academic. There's just too much messed up about the whole system. And it's just like a very unpleasant job relative to how it used to be. You're getting grants all the time. You're basically just an administrator. You're just in meetings all the time. So I thought, well, I had plans to move to Uruguay anyways, because of to try to escape the collapse of America.
You went to Uruguay, because I was going to ask you about Uruguay. You went to Uruguay to get out.
Yeah, like I was just like, I had learned too much about like the collapse of civilizations. I was like, I need to have a different plan, and just raising the kids differently, and not in a city, like having them understand where food comes from and this kind of thing. And we can talk about why I came back to Chicago too, if we want. But the plan with Rhizoma Field School was to get some students out, use my PhD, and then like teach in the field, like experiential learning about agroecology, and what we call regenerative agriculture here is pretty much the same. And so I hosted different universities on like either study abroad or volunteer abroad trips. And now I'm going to try to do a similar thing in the Midwest, bringing students out to like regen farms in the driftless region of Wisconsin, which is really cool. And there's a lot really interesting happening there. And, basically like bring them to the farms, have them do something hands-on, and then like have a debrief with the farmer. Like, why do you farm this way? What's important about it? and then have a debrief with me. And I'm like using environmental sociology to explain like this is what real environmentalism is, and like explaining that to them, because I've had like a few vegans on these trips who then like stop being vegans and start eating meat. Great. It was like, but they just eat the source it the right way.
So what's the region of the Midwest
that I want to go to? The Driftless. It is, yeah. So it's like northwest Illinois and southwest Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And it's this area that's like really hilly and basically row crop agriculture works best on flat land. And so any place that there are still hills, like in Appalachia or different, places around a lot of the Northeast, they just couldn't really get a foothold as much with the row crop agriculture because of the hills. And so there's still a lot of like small farms, family farms, diversified operations. And so there's like a lot of really cool things happening over there. And my like very good friend of Doomer Optimism, Peter Allen, runs this farm, Mastodon Valley Farm, over there. And he's like PhD in ecology, and decided in order to be a good ecologist, he's going to become a farmer. And so he's been doing like legit, like basically turning his pasture into oak savanna. And he like is like, humans are a keystone species. He's been like turning his forested area into savanna, and he's been cutting the logs himself, milling them himself, and built his family a home, timber frame, like in the past 3 or 4 years. Up until that point, they were just like living in like a yurt, and then I think in a small cabin, and carrying water, spring water, up a hill in buckets.
Oof.
Anyways, they're like, it's very like, a lot of Doomer Optimists are very like Bronze Age to some extent. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. They're like, people who are just adventurers, pioneers, like Pogue, he like goes to Central African Republic and gets, basically imprisoned for a time. Things like that, where people are kind of adventurers or wild in some ways.
Well, Pogue is like a through and through, he's like a war journalist, like he's like that type of guy. He wants to get on the edge and, be the correspondent for everything that's going on.
Yeah, totally. And we have another guy who I've always liked for a while, who's coming to our camp out in June, Eris Rusinos. He's also a war journalist. He writes for Unheard now, but he wrote for Vice before. And just like, I think people who like understand the world system to some extent and are like sort of trying to get ahead of, what's happening geopolitically and what does that mean for us, like on a practical level. So those are I love those type of people. I'm not a geopolitical person really at all. I really, to some extent, hate following those things because there's so much bad information out there, and like I'll only trust Pogue and Eris to like tell me what's going on. But yeah, it's
he's always very ahead of the curve on stuff. Like he's always like, I don't know any of the people he talks about. He's always like, oh, the congressman from Kansas. I'm like, I don't know any of these people, but he always seems to know who's going to be the next, like, like he was on Massey, like way before Massey was
totally.
a thing. And I was, that's how I found out about Massey, was through him, because I was like, I don't know who that is. So he knows every politician, like he knows all that stuff, like really well. And I'm kind of the same. I'm not like a geopolitics person. I don't know.
Although I'm glad they exist, and I'm like glad they're in our universe and can come talk to us about it. And like for me, the thing is always like what is happening geopolitically, big picture, and what does that mean for like how do I be prepared and think about what to do with my family more than anything else. But I still think it's important to pay attention to some extent, but just like I just can't go crazy with it, because it's infuriating trying to understand what's happening in the world. Like, I mean, even just the Ukraine war, I wasn't even really paying attention much because I was, was trying to run a homestead and had a lot of little kids in Uruguay. But like, just the weird, again, going back to what we talked about at the beginning, like the weird social media aspect of the Ukraine war, and like these people who are like get memed into going into being in the war. And then there's like all these weird subcultures as part of the fighters, and I don't know. Anyways, I can't make sense of it. And then people will say like Ukrainian Nazis but then
Yeah, right. And it's like,
there's
what are you
just
talking about? Yeah, and it's like I never like know what they mean. I'm always like, who are these? And
I,
yeah, but I think this does come from like I think that this is totally off topic, but I think that the way into like being a successful journalist today, which is a fake job in 99% of cases, but like the real ones, the ones who actually want to do it, like
yeah,
Pogue, um, they have to do some sort of like duty as a war type correspondent.
yeah,
And once they do that, then they're like, oh, well, he has the credentials to like move up in the system. Because I think it's kind of a vestigial structure of like how journalism used to work. So
yeah,
I think that's why, right, it's so true with Ukraine. It's like everybody's speaking this language, and I'm like, I have no idea what any of these things are. Like, who are all these people? What are these? Yeah, what are the Nazis? Wagner Group? And I'm just like, I don't know any of this stuff. Like, where do you guys learn these things?
I
And I
know.
think it's because like the tiny bit of masculine energy that still exists in mainstream journalism is like dedicated to that. It's like
Yeah,
war, talking about war.
yeah. I mean, well, one thing I'll say on that though is like it is true that there is like a correct way to report things that is reliable and that produces good information. And people like Pogue, and I would argue like Eris Fusinos and then Matt Taibbi, I think still does a really good job with this, where you're like, there's a way to fact check things, to get original documents. I don't know if you were following. I'm like a big Matt Taibbi fan, and he's
Yeah.
doing this thing now where he's sourcing original documents to just link to in his own server, because now with AI and everything else, people are just altering documents and then sort of like changing history. And so he's like just getting original, like, court documents or treaties or whatever else that is being referred to. I think that's really smart. He's very much like ahead of the game with that kind of thing too, thinking like, next step, we need to just have a repository of original documents. And he even said on his podcast, like, if you guys want to just download these and save these to your personal computers, like you're not supposed to, but nothing can stop you.
What are the documents? Like what sort
Like
of
it's like if you're referring to, the Ukraine war, it's like some treaty that was agreed upon in 1989 or something like that, and he'll like pull the actual treaty, put it in his server so you can like follow the documents along.
Yeah, it's like, you better download this because they're gonna try and shadow edit it.
Yeah, everything is fake and lies, so it's nice to have a source where you can trust.
Yeah. I really think this is where everything is going with people like you and people like Taibbi. I really think this is like going to be the new divide. And I think that a lot of the right-wing, left-wing stuff is going to disappear. And it's going to be kind of new sides. And it's not going to be so you're right, you're left, and I hope that happens because, but I guess, wait, actually, before we go into this question, you were getting to Rhizoma. I don't think we got.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, basically, Rhizoma is this field school where we have the students come to Uruguay and come work with these producers. It's like a good way to make, it's like kind of gigs, you work on these little gigs on these trips. And then I'm planning to do it again in the US. And I think I'll be working with a local university here in the Midwest to bring some students out. And one thing I didn't mention, I really want to start an urban orchard, like a teaching orchard with heirloom varieties. I've got a friend of Doomer Optimism has a regen orchard in Northern California that makes cider that's in a bunch of Michelin star restaurants in the Bay Area. So he's like huge, cider nerd basically, but really smart and doing the hands-on things. And so he said he'll come out and like advise me to do some sort of like teaching orchard in Chicago, where I'm like, I'm of the mindset that there's just a lot of beauty in farming and different kinds of cultivation that you can bring people together beyond this left-right thing. If you can just showcase, like, here's a beautiful orchard, here's how you pick apples, here's why it's important to have pollinators, these kinds of basic things. So that's part of the Rhizoma project.
So why is it called Rhizoma?
Rhizomes, that's in Spanish, rhizoma. Rhizomes are like a root structure that sort of move laterally. So you can, it's kind of like, it's like, you know what, to be honest, I went the other day to the Chicago it's called the Food Justice Summit. And a lot of these people are the people that I studied in my dissertation. My dissertation was studying people who do food production for themselves in and around Chicago, including rural people. And a lot of them have this like either rhizome or like mycorrhizal, which is how mushrooms spread with this sort of substrate. And it made me feel like self-conscious, like, oh my God, I'm just the same as all these people. Even though it's just like, but anyways, I like the idea anyways. It's decentralized. It's sort of, horizontal instead of hierarchical, where like if different forms of, and I think about this with Doomer Optimism too, if different little groups pop up, you can spread laterally. It's not reliant on sort of like a central structure to continue to spread, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, it's a Deleuze thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
it
is.
Deleuze?
Yeah, I mean, but I think it's that was like a big metaphor Deleuze and Guattari used, like as sort of a social theory thing. But there's a lot of different active, sort of sociological thinkers who have used this sort of metaphor for.
Well, it's a great name. You have lots of good names. So to return to this question that we were just talking about politics, like sort of what I want to ask, you have this balance where you talk about Christianity, you talk about having potlucks, you talk about this kind of Midwestern. It's not Midwestern at all, but just this sort of like localist mindset. And it's funny. I experienced it. The closest I've ever experienced to that like pure feeling of community was in Geneva, Illinois, where my grandparents are from. And, they're like 400 years in Chicago WASP people on that side. And, buried their, did you have the thing being from Chicago where they buried the silverware in the Chicago fire? Did you guys have that?
No.
That's like a thing.
Okay.
So anyway, and I was in Geneva, Illinois, and it was like the Sunday afternoon and everybody was like leaving church. And it was just this like beautiful, perfect community thing. It felt like this is what it's all about. Like, this is what you want without interference. This is what community really can be.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, though, it's like those people are very left wing. A lot of these Midwesterners, they're either kind of like very, be a good person type of Protestants, or they're straight up, what do they call it? Congregationalists, who are like, totally no hierarchy at all.
Yeah.
So it's like this weird, I feel like we all want the same thing, but it's this weird balance between like right wing stuff, which is like, traditional religion is good, like traditional families, that kind of stuff. And then left-wing stuff, which is like no predatory capitalism that just destroys everything that it touches, right? Kind of.
Yeah. I mean, I think like to some extent, the biggest divide here has to do with, and this is me speaking more as a sociologist, like the utopian construction of community versus like a sort of inherently already existing community that survived for some reason or another because it was successful to some extent. So I think like I can think of, and I actually had a big insight about this when I was in Uruguay once, where I was invited to this potluck with American missionaries in Uruguay. And it was a bunch of American missionaries. And I walked in the door, and the one guy, the pastor, the dad, picked up my baby, was like, here, I'll hold your baby while you get a plate of food. And there's like a ton of food. Everybody's helping. Everybody's super friendly. And then I was like, I've been to a bunch of left-wing potlucks over the years, and they're like, nobody brings anything that's good. Everything is vegan and gluten-free, so it's horrible. Nobody like knows the basic stuff of like inviting you in, or like, let me hold your baby for you, or anything like that. And I was just like, But I think the divide is more like a utopian, like let's construct community in a way that's self-conscious versus a we kind of have a culture of, if somebody has a functional culture about how to, get along and host a potluck or host an event, then it's just a lot more successful than when you're too self-conscious about it. But my husband has this funny joke. I think it was Andrew Bird. I don't know. Some musical artist was telling this joke. Like, we went to this anarchist meeting at University of Illinois, but no one would start the meeting. One of those things where like everyone's so self-conscious that like they're so intentional and self-conscious, and there's this right-wing versions of this too now popping up, like let's make an intentional community but for right-wing people. And I just like, just be careful. I've been in so many intentional communities because I traveled around the world a lot after college and before grad school, and it was like there's just so many pitfalls to trying to start from scratch and trying to be too self-conscious about it. And that's the real divide for me.
It's similar to another topic that you talk about a lot, which is the birth rate problem, which is that the more intentional you are about it, the less it works for some reason.
I know. I mean, there's so this natalism conference, like I think the idea is really cool to try to like at least talk about the problem, but there's a couple of people going to that thing who I'm like, they're weirdos, to be honest. They're not a model. Like those Collins people. I mean, I know maybe.
Yeah, I had him on. I had him on once.
And they're like really spreadsheet brained about the natalist problem. And I'm like, this is not a model we really want to be following or promoting, in my opinion. Like, there's
the
just
Musk manufacture the babies.
Yeah, if we take that to its logical conclusion, let's just have all the babies in artificial wombs and be freed from the burdens of childbirth. And now we're, as far left progressive as we've ever, we could ever be. So
there's also something about it that's very like, I think that there are certain like lies that we have to tell each other that are the pillars of like our marriage system. And the rationalists and like the Elons are really uncomfortable telling those lies, and they don't want to tell them. And so they're
what
like,
do you mean by lies? I'm curious.
Well, like, look, I'm not saying every man is like this, but I have a friend who's deep. This is what the elites, like the tech elites, do these days. They're all rich. They're all in perfect shape because they're getting surgery and they're working out 17 times a day. And the guys, this girl that I know writes about this, and she's in the scene. All the guys say they're poly. This is like the new thing. They're all like, I'm poly. And yet she always somehow meets these guys on vacation without their wives. And they all say, I'm poly, but my primary is not with me right now. And then she like sleeps with them. And then I'm like, it's just a guy cheating on his wife. Like, it's not, it's not.
You're not inventing anything new here. Just be honest about what's happening.
Right. Yeah. Just like, just don't talk about it or own it. But like, don't make up this thing where now it's like, it's okay because we talk about it. Like, no, it's not okay.
So actually, this is like central to a lot of, I think, where we've gone off the rails, which is, for example, like, gays and lesbians. It was like, for the most part, most people are sort of fine with gays and lesbians existing. We all know somebody in our family who's, kind of was always a little different, whatever. But when you take it out of, you take any kind of deviant thing out of the shadows and say, like, now it needs to be front and center. And not only do you have to like be aware of what's going on, you also have to accept it. And now we're in, gay pride parades where people are walking around naked in front of children. I'm like, it's too far. And the same thing is true with like polyamory. Like, it's very trad to have a high status male who has stuff going on the side. That has happened and will continue to happen through all of human history. Right. You don't normalize it. You just say like, it's kind of a messed up thing that happens. Sometimes people pull it off and they have like a sort of wink, wink understanding. This is what happens. But it's not like good
Yeah, no, it's a bad thing. Exactly. It's like it's a bad thing. It shouldn't be like the thing you lead with.
No,
You know,
right.
and it's like, right, because then it's turning sin, you know, out of sin, whatever, degeneracy, whatever you want to call it, into your identity. It's saying
Yeah.
like, I am my sin
Right.
because I'm gay.
Right.
And it's like, well, can't you just be gay without like talking about it all the time? You know, it's
Right.
like,
Right.
yeah,
And yeah, that's another part of it that's really huge is the making everything into your identity. It's not
right.
just like a
Yeah.
thing you do on the side or whatever. Now it has to be like this thing. Everybody has to accept my
Yeah. You have to
polyamory.
accept,
Everybody
right.
has
Yeah.
to talk about it. And then you
Yeah.
get into these weird situations where you're like in a social situation and it's like, I've heard of somebody from Twitter, a friend of mine met up with, and they're in a polyamorous relationship, a man with 2 wives, and they show up to dinner in dog collars on a leash.
Oh, God. Yeah. It's like,
No,
stop
no,
that. I
just
mean, like, look, if
no,
that's your thing, like,
not
fine.
at
Like,
dinner.
but exactly, like, don't expect it to be normalized.
Yeah,
That's
right.
it's like the average human, in order to make this thing work, we all have to make these agreements, and like marriage is one of these agreements. And it's like, you know, this is just how we have to structure things. It's
Right.
how it works, and you know, we're not going to like get around it in some
No,
way.
and
But it's like, let's be really honest. And this is like Elon. It's a little bit of the issue with what Elon's doing. It's
well,
like,
and to me, I would
yeah,
argue it's like a far leftist deconstructionist attitude to say none of these things were ever anything. We can just now, you know, invent new models for marriage or, you know, sexuality or whatever, and there's no downstream consequence of that. We cannot deconstruct everything and not expect, you know, sort of bad things to result. Where there are better or worse models here, and these models evolved and these institutions evolve for a reason. So it's sort of like,
exactly. And it's like, and eroding them seems to be having the exact effect that everybody said that eroding them would have, which is that, you know, yeah, that everything starts to fall apart. And
yeah, but you
yeah,
should, I would also argue, and this is another thing we try to do with Doomer Optimism, is like, but then that doesn't mean you should go so far in the other direction that you're like fetishizing the trad wife thing
sure.
either.
Okay.
You know, so
Yeah.
there's like a weird, like, constant pendulum swinging where it's like, well, okay, I don't agree with like, you know, gay pride parades where people are walking around in furry masks or whatever, but then that doesn't mean you're then like fantasizing about like eggs and homestead and like long beards. And I know this one guy from Twitter who I met in person who was a Black Flag anarchist, then moved to the trad side, Catholic, and we were hanging out at this event one time, and it's like 95 degrees, and his buttons are all the way buttoned up to the neck, and he's got a hat on and a big beard, and he's like sweating, and I'm like, you could unbutton like you could put on a t-shirt, and he's like, you know, totally committed to the bit.
To
and
the
I'm
bit,
like,
right?
oh my
Yeah.
God, like, can we just be normal about these things? So I like say like
Yeah.
being a normal person is part of my thing, and people are like, what do you mean by normal? It's like, I mean, you kind of know it when you see it, you know?
Yeah. What do you mean by normal? Well, and this is something that is also a Midwestern thing, I think.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, like it's like understanding what normal is
Yeah. Just like,
sort of something. Yeah.
you showed up to my family party dressed with that hat and that buttoned up shirt all the way to the top and that big beard.
yeah, people
People
would
would
be
be like,
like,
what's this guy's deal?
right. Yeah.
You know, that's a good test.
Right. Like, yeah, what is he doing? It's funny because I have clients in the Midwest, and it's, you know, I've never really been much of a Midwestern person, but it's like I now see like there really is, and maybe this is something that will grow. Like there's a very strong Midwestern culture, and it really is a lot about like just be normal.
Yeah, right.
You know, just don't be weird. You
Like,
know,
yeah,
like
why do you have to
yeah,
upset
yeah, like let's
vote
do
so
everything
much?
in a reasonable, measured fashion. You
Yeah,
know,
right.
like,
Right.
you
And it
know?
doesn't have to be like, it can be, I mean, so I would say I left the Midwest and traveled around, and I was, you know, living in this foreign country for a while. And so, you know, I think to some extent you do need to, I at least advocate, like, you can be cosmopolitan, you can get out of the Midwest, you can see what all these other things are in the world. But I found it was really interesting to find when I went to Uruguay, we had a really nice little community down there. all the things I liked about the community were the things I already had in the Midwest with my family, of like, we kind of show up for each other. Everybody just sort of hangs out. You keep track of what's going on in each other's lives. If something, hard is happening, you show up, you bring them a meal, you take their kids, whatever. So it is funny to sort of have this whole cosmopolitan journey and then come back and be like, oh, we kind of have it worked out here to some extent.
Yeah, as it is, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, let's talk a little bit about some of your like specific work here. So, let's see. So you are into, I was reading some of your recent pieces, and you're into Christopher Lasch. I think you say something cool here, which is you're kind of trying to define this thing called left conservatism. I don't know. Are you still on the left conservatism path?
So what happened with left conservatism is this publication in the UK called The New Statesman, which is kind of like their maybe New Yorker Atlantic kind of publication, reached out to me, an editor for them, and said, would you write a piece about left conservatism, which is not something I ever had heard of before. But he thought that I would be a good person to write about it. So then I went on Twitter and asked people, I did a little research, and I found this old video of Norman Mailer talking about left conservatism.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
Which was cool. Yeah. And then I went on Twitter and asked people, what do you think of this concept of left conservatism? And the normal, partisan people were like, it's impossible. It's impossible to be both, because if you're a conservative at all, you can't accept any of the leftist stuff. So then I'm trying to define it. Anyways, then the New Statesman, they're basically got super competitive to get a piece in there, even though they reached out to me. So then they were like, no, it's too competitive. We can't run it. So then I ran it at Unheard, which is nice. And Unheard's a great publication too. Anyway, so I was just musing on this concept because it's not really something I was coming up with myself. They asked me to write about it. And the way that I defined it was basically we have both the hegemon of the state and of unfettered corporation, unfettered global capitalism, to sound like a leftist. But there are multinational corporations that have a lot of say over what happens in our lives. And a lot of times, they're just not very well controlled. Same with the state. There's an oversized state, whether it's the nation state or this, these international agreements, these international bodies who are making decisions about, what our future is going to look like, and, the World Economic Forum and these kinds of organizations. The idea being we should be sort of skeptical and resisting to both this oversized market and the oversized state. And instead, we should be thinking about ways in which we could build on a scaled down level and in ways that make sense for our own the particular issue. And so there's this idea of subsidiarity, which is basically and this is, comports with the federalist, U.S. system super well. But basically, you want to ask what the problem is you're trying to solve, and then think about the scale, the lowest possible scale that could solve that problem. Rather than thinking, I want to save this national forest, and so I need to lobby the federal government and Department of Interior to figure this out. But instead, what is the lowest possible scale I could deal with to try to manage this forest?
And that's called what did you call it?
Subsidiarity.
Subsidiarity. I like that. It's a good compass, a good concept.
Yeah. Cool. And so it's helpful, and it's a very big thing in Doomer Optimism too, which is like I was saying before, I don't really care what you're doing in New Hampshire. Why do I have to have any say over what you're doing in some other part of the world if it's your own little project? And so the idea being, we can work on these lower scales. And a perfect example of this that we had on Doomer Optimism, there is a group who's working on the Ohio River watershed, trying to work on getting more sustainable regen food in the Ohio River watershed. That's their focus area. And I'm I love that. It's you're focused on a specific area. It has an identity, as a cultural identity, as a geographic identity. And then, you're working on a specific issue in that area, and you're not you don't really care what's happening in the federal government. You're just focused on that particular issue.
Yeah. So is that what left conservatism is, though? Like, is left conservatism? I mean, so you say the milieu of thinking doesn't belong to a set political tradition, hence the contradiction in terms. But above all, left conservatism centers the local, the particular, and the human scaled.
Yeah. So
yeah.
So it's hard to say exactly what it is, because what it is would be literally just millions of different projects,
Right,
which already do exist. And the whole point I try to bring out is like, these things are already happening. You just have to put a different lens on it, that it's like, that it's a thing that fits into this way of thinking. Because I think a lot of times now people will see something and they'll either categorize it as like, oh, it's not important, who cares? Like, who cares that you're running for the local school council? You know, but I think you should care. And I think we should start to see all of these things as like a patchwork of an alternative political order that like is very American in nature. Just, you know, the citizens getting together, sort of self-organized, and self-reliant. And I guess like that the idea there is that it's not just one thing. It's going to be this patchwork of things that sometimes looks political and sometimes it just looks civic, like some kind of civic orientation, that it's not necessarily a left-right thing, but it's just, you know, a group solving a problem at that,
right,
you know, arising.
Yeah. So how can we this temptation, so it also reminds me kind of, it's similar to your work on energy. You have some recent articles, or a recent article or two about energy, and you're sort of saying that there are a lot of energy solutions that are just lower down, right?
Yeah.
It's not like we constantly, it's subsidiaryism in the energy field, which is, there's a lot of solutions we could do just right here that aren't, you know, put windmills everywhere, or, you know, it just endlessly, we get more energy.
Well, and again, like it's like industrial or machine thinking that everybody's
line go up. It's line
everybody,
and
everybody's always thinking the solution to the machine has to be some other machine. Like, and so this is a big thing in a lot of people who are just studying environmental sociology. I have a friend who is an environmental engineer. And he basically like does a real life cycle analysis of these various material throughputs on various industrial solutions. So things like windmills and solar panels and electric vehicles. And he did this whole big analysis on electric vehicles, basically comparing them to like an older, already existing you know, regular internal combustion engine, and found that it was worse for the environment, the electric vehicle, because you have all these different materials. And he sort of did the analysis all the way through. Well, he can't get the paper published, of course.
Yeah, of course.
So it's one of those things where like people just want, like, let me just get an electric vehicle, problem solved, or, you know, let me just build all these windmills, huge amounts of concrete and materials, and you can't recycle them, so then they just bury them in the ground, or then they, you know, shred them up. And the whole point of the other things that I've been talking about, lower energy solutions, and Wrath of Non is really big and good account on Twitter on these kinds of things.
Yeah,
but
I've seen Wrath of Non.
He's great. I mean, he just says, like, this is similar to the cultural things. There are built environment ways, traditional built environment ways to solve a lot of these energy problems, like whether it comes to cooling or heating. There's like masonry stoves, there's passive solar building, there's ways to insulate the home, there's ways to build the home so that the air moves, cooler air moves through it. Like, there's different ways to actually solve the problems that aren't just generate electricity, turn the electricity into something that can power an appliance that then cools or heats your home, or cools or heats your water, or whatever. And so I'm just really interested in, like, why couldn't we just develop some of these lower tech but still technological developments for way higher quality of life that isn't just like pure industrial machine way of doing things.
Yeah. So this is sort of what I wish that had happened with feminism. Like, I wish feminism had been this like break on the Excel brained
Mm,
stuff,
mhm.
but somehow feminism got turned into more Excel brained stuff,
I know. That's
somehow.
another beat that I've been on a lot because I'm a mom of 3 kids and, like, I mean, the whole idea I was just looking at Substack today and somebody was saying, every year you take out of the labor market, you lose X amount of earning power. And my response to that was like, is there any metric in the whole entire world that matters more than earning power possibly? Like, maybe like being with your kids or seeing their first steps or
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's just only one metric. And that's supposedly a feminist argument that
I know.
like
Isn't that
you
so
should
insane?
it's so and then I almost feel like sometimes I'm like this Cassandra type figure, which is like somebody who's, screaming that there's some crisis impending. Um, because I'm like, you guys are forgetting what you forgot about what like female empowerment is supposed to be. It's supposed to be
Right.
like, empowerment toward choosing these paths, especially, like the most feminine thing you can do of like raising your own kids. And I don't know.
Yeah. I'm reading this book right now called Careless People, which is this expose of Facebook by this woman. She's from New Zealand, and was high up. She was like one of the top people.
Okay.
And clearly Cheryl pissed her off so much that she left and wrote a tell-all, which is like it's great. I love that. I love when this happens. Like I love reading these like
but then
tell-alls.
it's like an anthropological study of what's going on inside the
Exactly. It's like you're going to get much better information from this than you are from like anything else.
Yeah.
But it's really all about techno feminism. That's basically what the entire book is about, because she's from New Zealand. She comes from this like simple family, and Cheryl has just written Lean In, which is like all about. I've never read Lean In, but I think it was like a huge sensation for a minute there, and I think it's all about like you can do both. You can be a mom and employee at the same time, and you got to figure out how to do both things. And so she's like really trying to like get in good with Cheryl, and she literally like is flying around and like she's trying to pump because she just had a kid, and like the baby is like missing, and it just makes me think like this. The funny thing is, like, she thinks that the problem is that the corporate sphere is not accommodating to women. And I'm like, I don't think the corporate sphere is ever going to be. It's like, I don't think the solution is like, let's make pumping common at the airports. It's like, I don't think that that's ever really going to happen.
I know. I'm very much like a big person on you need to just have agency in your life. And if you want to do something, you should just find a way to do it. And I think people get really mad at me online because I'm just like, if you want to be with your kids when they're babies, you can find a way to do it. We live in America. We're not like nobody is destitute. Almost nobody. Maybe the bottom 5% or something. So, not anyone who's on Twitter arguing with me. So the idea being like, that you just need to have a more corporate friendly baby policy. It doesn't hurt, especially if you have a little baby, like a toddler at home or something like that. And they'll have like more limited hours or something and that let you come home and that kind of thing. But like, just look at the structure you're in. This is how I felt about academia. Like, just look at how it is. I'll see all these academics and, their babies are at home. And it used to be like in academia, that would be one of those jobs where you'd have some freedom of time. Like you could be home a little bit, you could write, like you'd have to come in for classes a couple times a week and maybe some advising appointments. But otherwise there was like some flexibility around that. And now it's just like, I see what they do. They put their babies in daycare at 6:30 a.m. and then they pick them up at 6:30 p.m. and they're away from them for 12 hours a day. And, like time is just not infinite. Resources are not infinite, and your choices matter. So if you care, find a way to be with them. I personally kind of upended my life to do so, and I'm glad I did.
So how did you do that?
So as I was getting my PhD, I started having kids. Again, that was more time flexible. And then I did the field school and moved to Uruguay. And we saved up some money before we went, and then, ran this field school. But it was basically this concept of downshifting, which is, you earn less, but you spend less. You have a lower cost of living. So we moved to Uruguay while the kids were babies. I have 3 little girls, and basically we just like lived really cheaply. And you could live really cheaply in the US too. You don't have to move to a foreign country to do this, just to be with your kids. And we had chickens running around, we had cattle, we had horses, orchard, we had our nice little community there. And, I was just living life and being with them while they were little. But I, in the meantime, was still doing stuff, writing. I finished my PhD. You can still do things in your career, but my ultimate goal wasn't like maximize lifetime earnings.
Yeah, right.
It was just not. I mean, there's just so many, like the memories I had and the start. Why have kids if I'm not going to start them in their life the best way I possibly can?
But why is this obvious to you and not obvious to so many other women? Like,
I mean,
how can they not tell that they're being completely manipulated? I mean, it's.
I know.
Yeah.
I think people do like mental backflips, and I think there's a whole there's like I was saying before, people forgot what they forgot. And then what happens is that I've seen this literally probably hundreds of times of different women I know. They have the baby. They think like, I'm just going to do what everybody else does. I'm going to do my maternity leave of 6 weeks. I'm going to put the baby in daycare. And then they have basically like a psychotic break of like, I can't do this. And I'm like, and then they don't know what to do when they've gotten to that point. And they've just been told like everybody else does it. And then they have like this terrible moment where they're like, I have to do it. And then some of them just kind of freak out and figure it out and quit their job. And other ones just like power through it and tell themselves that they're doing the right thing. And then just feel super guilty. And they just say like, well, everybody else does it, so it's okay, kind of thing. And so I've seen, people go in different directions. I've got a lot of peers who were like maybe on some path and then just had this break moment, and they were like, I'm just not doing this. I'm not going to put them in daycare.
So why did you leave Uruguay?
So there's a couple of reasons. One, I did kind of have this realization that my family and community here in Chicago, my neighborhood, was like, it had so many of the things that we had in Uruguay, and more so because we're blood related, and so like we've got this, network of people. My dad and my husband's dad were all from the same neighborhood, and so we have like multi-generational family friendships that have formed in this neighborhood. Also, we always had the idea that I was kind of inspired by the FIRE movement. Do you know what FIRE is?
What is that again?
It's financial independent, retire early. It's like Tim Ferriss and Mr. Morning Mustache, like 4-hour work week. Basically, I was reading those guys when I was like just getting out of college. And then I realized like, oh, you don't have to like retire early, but you could take like a sabbatical while your kids are little. So that we always kind of had the idea that when the kids got a little older and we're going back to school, that we would ramp up our work lives. And then I was realizing in Uruguay, I like hosted these Doomer Optimism events in the Wagon Box in Wyoming. It was like going back to the US 2 times a year, 3 times a year, like from Uruguay, which is far. I'm like, this is stupid. Like I think I want my career, whatever I'm doing, vocation, it doesn't necessarily have to be career, but like the things I'm interested in pursuing, they exist in the core of the empire, not the periphery. And so I was like, I got to just get back into the core, but we still have the land, so we can run away if we have to.
Really? Oh, so you still got it down there?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is such a common thing, of people, especially after COVID. You saw this thing of people on both sides, all different types of people being like, I'm out. I'm going to Kansas. I'm going to some place, and all of them came back.
Yeah.
So you're not alone.
And I think like it's okay to be honest about that, but I mean, I think I'm still like cautiously moving forward in the future when it comes to just, I don't know. My biggest fear with the US is like so many people who I'm surrounded by just in cities have zero resilience or skills in the case of actual disaster. Like
Right.
if there's any real disaster, the grocery store will be empty in a day and then it will turn bad.
Yeah. What do they say? It's like cities have like 3 days of
Yeah.
food. It's
Yeah,
like, yeah,
yeah.
we're all
And in
completely
Uruguay, the
screwed.
one thing I was always like was great about the people in the community there is everybody has their own cow. Everybody knows how to do things. Everybody knows how to chop wood. Everybody knows how to get water if they need to. Like they've been through multiple crises in their lifetime. Like, so it was one of those things where even if the worst happens, like everybody knows how to get by. Nobody's gonna be pillaging each other. In Chicago, I'm like, I will be out of here as fast as possible if the issue
Yeah, no, you're
happens. And so I'm
screwed.
like still like cautious about that, but you know, in the meantime, I can just do what I can in this area with my family, with with my kids' local school, with my neighborhood, like just getting involved in things. So
Well, I think that says a lot. Like, yeah, right. You didn't just keep it idealistic. You were just like, okay, well, I have a lot of these things already, like
yeah.
near me, so I don't need to go and like create them somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah, and it's weird, like, to be so utopian to some extent because, like, I have actual family members who, like my parents and my husband's parents who, like, are getting older, who, like, need help. I've got, like our siblings are having babies, and we wanna be there and have bring them a meal or take care of the kids. So, there's, like, a real, already existing obligation I have in this, area. So, why I think I got psyop to some extent. Like, let me go find a perfect community on the other side of the globe when it was.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's pretty normal, and you also kind of got to do it in
Yeah,
order to, you got to like really learn the hard
yeah,
way, or else you're
yeah,
always going to be thinking, well, what if I did this?
yeah, yeah. And everybody's super interested in the Uruguay story. Like, oh, I gotta find somewhere like that, And then if I say like, oh no, just go back to the place where you're from and like be a engaged member of the community, people hate that message.
Yeah,
They
right. They're
want to
like,
hear
oh
like
no, yeah,
utopian, vision of life and,
yeah,
palm tree
totally.
land. Yeah.
So how do we like this? It seems like in front of us is this difficult situation where, right, it's like the industrial growth pattern just will not stop, and I agree with it. I get it. I mean, like, I'm somebody, I want to explore space. I'm not a total, I understand that particularly for guys, this discovery and building and growth, it's like the reason to live,
Yeah.
so it's like you're never going to be able to get rid of that, because it's like we're always going to be wanting to do that. I always use the example of, speaking of congregationalists, the integrated circuit, like computers as we know them, like the microchip was created by a bunch of like hardcore congregationalists in Iowa.
Okay, I did not know that.
Yeah, I know. And nobody thinks about this, but it's
Yeah.
like that's who really made computers as we know them. And it's because these guys are sitting around eating their cornflakes, bored out of their minds. And so, of course, they're going to do something, and they built computers, basically.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, like, that thing is not going to go away. At the same time, it's like, man, how do you convince people to not to write? Like, how do you say, like, look, you're losing everything that makes it worth being alive at the same time? You're losing everything else, right?
I
You're
know.
losing everything else.
I know. I mean, basically that will if I'm to describe the vocation of my life, it's trying to demonstrate like the human scaled, the humane versus the machine. Like, what makes us human? Like, what is it that keeps us from becoming cyborgs? And so I think, but my hypothesis is that I think people know it when they see it, and they will be drawn to it if you show them. And so I have that's part of the whole idea with Rhizoma Field School. It's like, it's an experience. It's experiential learning. If I sat those vegans in a classroom and said, like, regenerative agriculture builds the microbes in the soil and blah, 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 they would not have any idea or they wouldn't be convinced, because you can make the same kinds of rational arguments on the side of veganism. Like, it's immoral to kill animals ever. And so if you get them out onto the farm and you see these people handling these animals in such a way as to like be basically keystone species cultivating an ecosystem, and you see all that in it, you know, in process, then you start to see like, okay, this is cool. Like, I can understand this system. I understand why it's beautiful, why it's good, why it's beneficial. And so I think it's got to be experiences. And then, you know, and I think there's a lot of ways to make those experiences. I have this idea in my neighborhood. We have a bunch of families, and I think, you know, people crave good quality community. We have a bunch of families who we know, who are always trying to like get together, but they all have little kids. So we've got this local park, and we're just going to do a monthly park hangout. Like, bring your stuff, you know, anyone can invite anyone. The kids are going to go play at the park. So they'll be like, you know, it's not a huge pressure to host on any one family. And people will just hang out. And we did this in Uruguay all the time, where we just like hung out, drank mate all day with the other families. So I'm going to do that too, and just see how it goes. I want to build this orchard. Like, there's just a bunch of ways in which you can sort of be the person who's demonstrating the humane, the beautiful in your life, and people will be drawn to it. I'm just so convinced of that.
I really do think that that's true. And I think that that's also like, that's, women are better at that than guys. And like, that's what women should do. That's what feminism should be. Feminism should be like creating local community.
Yeah, totally. Like, although you could be like, I mean, I'm still big on like the pioneer, like Peter Allen building his house out of timber frame. Like, you're a pioneer. You're like, you know, you're an explorer. Like James going to Africa and figuring out what's going on there. Like, there is a male version of this that isn't necessarily like just fantasizing about Mars. Part of the problem I have with the Mars vision is just that like so few people are actually engaged in it. You know, you could think about it as like a fantasy, but I think to some extent people like the Mars vision because it is a fantasy, and it's, instead of like, get out there, like go like fell some trees, go, you know what I mean? Like get, you know, go do something physical in the world, go travel to Ethiopia and find some rare earth minerals. And I shouldn't say that as an environmentalist, but you know, like this whole idea, like there's adventure to be had. Like,
well, what I want, this has not worked so far at all, but you know who the Situationists are?
No.
So the Situationists, that's like Guy Debord, like Society of the Spectacle. Okay. So they were, they had this thing where like the act of rebellion was to go on a walk without a map and just like wander around, you know? And it's like, that was like actually the most rebellious thing you could do, because I'm sure they didn't call it the machine, but whatever word they had, was forcing you into these patterns, and you know, you had to get out and just like wander around.
Yeah, right.
That's kind of how I see it. Like, I feel like there's more weird stuff going on like down the street in some place that you just never would go than in Africa, you know, like there's probably weirder stuff happening. Like,
well, I mean, like Andy Hickman, I don't know if you follow him at all on Twitter, but he's
I've seen him.
Friend of the podcast. And, you know, part of it, I think, is there's like a class thing going on, because he suggests like, just go buy a $40,000 house or whatever. And then people,
isn't he the guy who said, go meet girls at gas stations?
Yes. And he also said you could,
I don't know about that one.
He also said you could live on your grave if you buy a grave. You buy a grave plot, and you can just live on. And we're like, okay, Andy, like dial it back, whatever. But at least he's thinking outside the box and is like, you know, like there's adventure to be had. There's like, you just get out there. I mean, I've done so many fun things. There's this group called Earthship who builds these sort of like sustainable houses in New Mexico, and their whole team, I met them in Uruguay. Their whole team is like these weird, like sort of hippie redneck, or like sort of like dirtbag hippies who like build these houses out of garbage, and then like they work super hard during the day, and then they're drinking like, you know, a case of beer at night and going out to the beach and hanging out. Like, you know, there's just all these sort of weird subcultures you could explore if you were a young person, or even in your neighborhood. Like, who are these other people around me. Let's, get something going. There's just so much more interesting out there than people realize, I feel like.
Yeah, there definitely is. It's just such a hard thing because everybody's going to always view it as, well, you're just trying to, slow it down, like you're trying to. That's why it's like I feel like like actually what's really nice about what's happening is that actually like I think it used to be that the foreign thing was the good thing, right?
Right.
Like the imported thing was always better than the local thing because
Yeah,
it was the best, right? It
Right.
was a banana. You can't get a banana here.
Right.
Like, well, it's a banana.
Yeah.
Whereas now, because things have gotten so rotten, the local thing is now premium. It's now the premium thing.
Totally.
I talk about this company called Harry's Berries all the time. I'm obsessed with Harry's Berries. Harry's Berries is this local strawberry company, and the berry, you go to the market. I go to the farmer's market all the time, and they're always sold out like at 8 a.m. But you can get them in grocery stores, but they're $22 for a thing, and the other berries are $6.
Yeah.
And so everybody walks is like, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
But it's worth it every penny. I would rather go broke and bankrupt and literally I would rather be bankrupt on the street and eat Harry's Berries versus eat those disgusting white center fake strawberries.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's the thing that they really can't. I don't think they can fake it. I think they think they're going to be able to fake it.
Yeah.
I think that, look, no offense I like Mark Andreessen, but I think Mark Andreessen's thinking when he hears this, oh no, we're going to simulate it. We're going to get to the point where you're not going to be able, and people like you are going to shut up because you're not going to be able to tell the difference. I don't think they're ever going to get it. I don't think it's possible. I don't think they can fake it to that degree.
No, and they're always saying like, no, just wait until the technology develops.
Right. Yeah, wait until
and then eventually, and it's like, I mean, even things like this artificial womb, even surrogacy, which is now like on the rise. And I have a family member who had a surrogate just because she just felt like it. And it's like, one of those things where it's just like, well, the technology is going to get there or whatever. And I think like one thing I realized traveling around the world is like the homogenization, like just the slop, the
that's
MTV of everything.
Yeah.
Everything is from China, everything is plastic, it tastes exactly the same. It doesn't matter where you go, you can get all the same stuff. And now it is like the status symbol to have something particular, something local, something that you can only get at a certain time. And so this is part of the reason I like the idea of the heirloom orchard, or like you have your own fruit trees. And it's like, I have this lemon tree that you have to bring in. And of course I'm coming from Uruguay where it's like abundance. We have all these trees, we have all this stuff. We can barely take care of it. And now I'm in this city and I have one lemon tree and it's got one lemon on it. It's so like embarrassing now relative. But anyways, the lemon was like the tastiest, most fragrant lemon I've ever had in my life. And hopefully we'll get more this year. But it's just one of those things where it's just like, you cannot buy this. You become more rich. All of this stuff that otherwise you just cannot get anywhere else. And I think this way about human relationships too. Like people will just not have community or not have an interdependence because they think they can just pay the DoorDash driver and pay the daycare worker and pay the old folks home. And it's just one of those things where, there is something quality in those interdependent human relationships that you cannot buy. You just cannot buy it otherwise. And people think that they can buy it. And that's been like the lie of the past couple of decades where these things have just eroded. And it's just like, let's just buy, these kinds of relationships. And people are realizing the limits to that now, I think.
It really is global Americanism because it's the Americans are the most isolated people by far. And, that's what I've learned about traveling around the world is every other people on earth is a lot more like connected to each other, whereas Americans are like extremely disconnected from each other. And they also, but I also think that we like it that way. Like, I also think that's part of the, it's like we do prefer it. And that's why they are trying to, the market is trying to offer these replacements for something that there is no replacement for, which is, like somebody to help you and, like these things.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. When it comes down to it though, I think like I mean, it's like I don't know if it's manufactured or revealed preference. Like, I think it's more there's more friction to, for example, like, making a meal for somebody else and bringing it to their house, and it takes time, and you're going to, take a bunch of their time, a bunch of your time, and have to visit with them for a little bit. But I think people do like it once they do it. And so it's one of those things where like the market made it easier theoretically, but then eventually those things are they're like a side effect, an externality people aren't thinking about, where it's like after so many weeks of never really talking to anyone, eventually it's like, well, now everybody's got postpartum depression. Well, where did that come from? Like, is it, just all of a sudden humans can't have babies without becoming depressed?
Yeah, it's like,
where did that come from?
what does that mean?
ADHD? Right. Where is autism? Where is all this coming from?
Yeah.
It's all these externalities from these choices we make that we think are like rational or because of the market, but they have a bunch of side effects that we're just not thinking of and we're not putting together.
Right. And then it's like the boomer parents are living in some other city and they're like, oh yeah, I'll fly in for the birth, but then I need to get back to my friends.
Right.
It's like, what are you, fucking 18? Like, you have grandchildren. Like, what are you doing?
I know.
And it's like, it really is a boom. Those friggin' boomers, man. And they're just
I honestly feel like millennials, I don't know, like at least the ones I know are really swinging back in the other direction. Like we're just not doing this. We're just gonna, even if it's just us helping each other, like I feel like my millennial peers here are like so old school and traditional. Like we're doing meal trains, we're showing up for each other, we're holding each other's baby, like just like that potluck I described, where people are like just showing up for each other in important ways. And so hopefully that gets to the next generation.
That's great to hear that that's what you're seeing. I don't know if that's totally caught on here in LA yet, but I mean, we're connected to so I actually, maybe this can be the last thing. I was going to say we're connected to the Chabad Jewish community. And so they're really, they're like extremists of community, like there's 14 kids and they all live in 3 houses that are like next to each other. And they all have, are just together all the time. There's a holiday every week. They're like extreme in the other direction. Yeah. And you'd also say like the Amish, I mean, in certain ways, like Islamic fundamentalism is like this. Yeah. Do you think, are you seeing people that are like doing this well? Like the Amish, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, well, so I don't really know that much. I think a lot of people project onto the Amish because they're like they dress a certain way and then they're like, they got to figure it out. Like they're doing Luddism right or whatever. But I've heard some inside reports from people who live near them that there's some weird stuff going on with the Amish, depending on they're not all one thing, but so yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think like at least in my neighborhood, and I think about this, I've kind of come back around and seen my neighborhood with new eyes. Like, so how I grew up, it's like firemen, they all have side jobs, they all kind of work together, they all do favors for each other. Everybody knows how to do something. So you've got 5 electrician buddies, you got plumber buddies, you got people who like show up and help each other. This sort of like network of favors. Common with like working class people more. I feel like that's continuing on, at least in this neighborhood, at least among the parents that I associate with at my kids' school. And it's like, I mean, this is like such a lame and not that inspiring message, but it's literally like, I'm on these group chats with different moms. We're like doing carpools, and then we're coordinating all this stuff, and then the kids get to spend more time together. And then you do a favor for this family, and then they do a favor for you. And it's like one of those things where, okay, well, hey, we got an invite to this thing. Can we drop our kids off with this family? And then it just becomes a sort of like network of favors. Mm-hmm. And I don't even think it has to be that intentional or that like self-conscious. It's just sort of like, I'm just trying to solve the day-to-day of like getting my kids to all their activities and being able to socialize and, and whatever. And so all these other moms and dads, but mostly the moms are the ones coordinating these things, are doing this day-to-day work. And then the kids become close friends, but not in this like forced play date kind of way.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
we're riding in the car together, they're walking home from school together. I'm big on like what is now called free range parenting, but just like letting your kids walk home from school and expecting them to like get home and have some responsibility and not having a cell phone or anything. Just get home. You know, you have some freedom on the way home to like hang out and talk, but find your way home, go to the park yourself, go to the local store yourself, like those kinds of things. I see this user saying nepotism is good. I wrote it in defense of cronyism piece on Substack, which is cool because I'm like, you know, I actually think cronyism, you know, of course we're thinking about like gangsters when we think about cronyism.
What does cronyism mean?
It's just, you know, it's the same as nepotism. You give favors to your cronies, the people who are like, who you trust over time. And I think a lot of people, like if I'm going to critique some of what happens online, people will try to sort of make quote unquote friendships with people who are ideologically the same as them. And actually, I was just seeing Lomez tweeting about this today, even though I'm supposed to be on a Twitter break. He was saying, actually, you need people who can prove themselves trustworthy over time. Like they're morally virtuous, and somebody who's reliable. And you'll come to find that anyone who like ideologically agrees with you, but they're like not virtuous, they might just change what their ideology is to fit in with whatever's, you know, popular at the time. But this person who's virtuous, who's reliable, who's been there for you, you might disagree with them on most things, but they're your buddy, they're your friend to the extent that you can trust them. And then, you know, now it's like the friend enemy distinction kind of thing.
But isn't it, so it reminds, I think the people who are the best on this are the good old boys. You know, yeah. And you're basically saying the same thing that they say about
politics, right?
Patronage.
Yeah, patronage.
And so cronyism, patronage, it's all the same thing, right?
I mean, are they talking about patronage on like a political scale though?
They're saying pretty much the exact. They're talking about it on a larger political scale.
Yeah, and
you're talking about it on a more like less meritocratic thing. And you know, their whole thing is meritocracy is total bullshit. It's a tool of control. You know, it's basically like they don't practice meritocracy, right. You know, like, so why are we pretending? And I think that that's really true. On the other hand, I don't know about you. A lot of this seems to me kind of like, not with you, but some other people, it seems like, you know, tech bro discovers friendship, you know, it's like, yeah, like, you know, like, yeah, of course, you know, like you can't.
It's true with me too. Like half the time I'm saying stuff where I'm just like, why do I even need to say this out loud? Right. I mean, even when it comes to like surrogacy or whatever, and people are like, well, what's wrong with it or what? And you're like, do I need to say out loud that like babies have connections to their mothers, like that the body matters, the human body matters at all in childbirth, you know, that like, so half the time I'm like explaining stuff where I'm just like, why do you even have to say this? But like I was saying before, I think sometimes people just get psyoped and then forget what they didn't even know in the first place. So then you kind of have to say this stuff out loud.
I think that we just have to remember that the reason it has gotten so extreme, the reason we've gotten here is because the countervailing idea of what we're talking about, which is basically individual freedom, it works. It works really, really well. And it's like, it works as an argument. Like, you know, somebody is just saying on here, we're at the point where grilling has become, here, this guy says, we're at the point where grilling at the family barbecue has become a major status symbol.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm most encouraged by, because like you're going to see, family is the hardest thing to have now, right? For all these reasons that we're saying.
Yeah.
So and like localism, it's now going to be a status symbol, which is really good, because that's like, it's kind of natural nature healing in the way that it should heal. The thing that I think, what I was saying before about like tech bro discovers friendship is like the story of individualism. That's so hard to replace. You know, the story of meritocratic individualism is like so ingrained. Yeah. And it's so ingrained in America that I think to sort of like overcome it, you have to have another story that's sort of similar. And I think that's kind of like what we're doing. It's like we're saying, freedom of association is sort of the wrong thing, but we really don't have a great word for it. Freedom of community.
Right.
That's just as important as freedom of individual, right?
So,
it's like,
yeah. NS Lyons just had a really, really good piece about this in Unheard, and
cool.
I really like him, and he's been at one of the Doomer Optimism events, and
really?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
And he's going to be at another one in November outside of Pittsburgh. So pay attention.
I think I'm going to come to the one in
June.
Up.
Oh, good. Okay, good.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's great, and he was basically just talking about this H-1B thing, like the meritocracy idea, and he made the argument that that's basically downstream of sort of like bureaucratic thinking of individuals as economic units that can be interchanged, and that's a different kind of rationalist calculation than the idea of like brotherhood or nationhood or citizenship that's built out of like a sort of identity based in love, like love for one's nation, love for one's place. And so that's a different kind of calculation than thinking in this rationalist way. And I would say that there is like a history of brotherhood, of belonging, of nationalism or pride of place in a more local sense that exists in America. That's a big part of like the federalist idea. And so that's the sort of counter culture that I'm interested in, is this kind of like love of place that then you love the place because of the people in it. You don't love it as like a rational actor,
as an idea,
like, as an idea, or as like how many resources are in that mountain or something like that. You think about it because you have memories on the mountain, and you've been walking with people on that mountain, and you want to take care of it, and you think it's beautiful, and you love it. So
it's not just like, let's have the food with that, it's not just like, oh, I love Vietnamese food,
right?
Let's just have Vietnamese food in a mall. And it's right, it's like we're pawing at something that's just like about the soul of things. It's really like the inside of the strawberry. It's like the inside of the strawberry, they can't fake it. They can't fake that white inside.
Look red, but once you taste it, you know that's fake. It's slop.
It's fake. Exactly. It's slop.
Yeah.
All right. Well, cool. This was super awesome. Thank you so much for joining. Yeah. So you have a book. You have a Substack that's really good. Actually, I really like your Substack. It's good because it's like
I just started using it. I've been
mostly really good
going on Twitter.
Sorry.
And then we have this Doomer Optimism camp out that is still open to buying tickets. It's if you go to thewagonbox.com, you'll see it on there. We're gonna have a big like Doomer Optimism Woodstock in Story, Wyoming at the end of June. Paul Kingsnorth's going to be there, and a lot of Eris Racinos is going to be there. James Pogue, myself, Paul McNeil, lots of really cool people who have just been friends of the podcast for a long time, and it's like tons of families. I'm bringing my family. Kingsnorth is bringing his. Eris is bringing his. Tons of camping. I think it'll be really fun.
Yeah, I'm going to try to get my family to go. My wife is maybe too community based, even for that, even for going to.
Well, this is funny because actually, Doomer Optimism, it's hard to have events because everyone's like, no, I'm cool. I don't have my own local community. I'm like, I know, but it's just fun to get together and talk with Paul Kingsnorth and hang out.
So who is Paul Kingsnorth? I've literally never even heard of Paul.
Oh, wow. Okay. So Paul, he did these, he's like a Gen Xer, very kind of famous ecologist, environmentalist. He was the editor of the Ecologist magazine. And then he had this sort of like, just, during COVID, he was just writing about like, the machine and the medical establishment. And then he sort of had this like big change, conversion to Orthodox Christianity. And so now he's kind of like, I think he's the guy who talks about the machine.
Okay.
And a lot of people were like sort of lefty environmentalists, like climate change or just like environmentalists, but then that all got hijacked by climate change and bureaucrats and the World Economic Forum. And we all were just like, wait, this isn't what we were drawn to this. We were drawn to environmentalism for like the beauty and the ecology. And a
Right.
lot of people sort of followed King's North's trajectory through that. And so if that makes
okay.
sense.
Cool. Yeah, I just followed his Substack. It looks cool.
Yep.
All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate the time. And yeah, I'll put all the
Yeah,
links.
fun.
And yeah, I'm gonna press my little outro thing now. But stay in touch.
Okay.
Talk to you soon.
Talk to you. Bye.